On a Sunday morning, 75 years ago, the world was shocked when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Our guest today is a professor right here at Rogers State University, David Ulbrich. And David, it's good to have you with us.
It's great to be here, sir.
You've been here before. You have a book out, by the way, that I want to mention to folks at home.
Thank you.
This is a copy of the book, Ways of War.
Yes, sir.
Which I have a copy.
Yes, sir.
And is incredible reading. I mean, the research was intense.
Yeah, thank you. I've been honored that the U.S. Air Force Academy has picked it up for required reading for all of their cadets. So it's being read by practitioners now, which is good.
You done good, boy.
Thank you, sir.
I remember my dad and mom talking about Pearl Harbor. We're talking about Fort Smith, Arkansas. They were driving down Garrison Avenue, which is the main street. My dad had purchased some grapes. This was before cars were air conditioned. They were eating grapes and cruising the main drag when the radio went silent in the car. It came back on. My dad was holding the grapes. Came back on with the news that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Mother said later it was involuntary. He just tossed the grapes out the window and said, "We're going to war." Did everybody know? Did everybody understand what that meant?
I think so. There had been a number of incidents running up to that, some incidents in the Atlantic Ocean and certainly some threats going on in the Pacific. But my father was born in 1921. I was an oops baby, so I heard the same sort of stories, and he was on his way home from church. And when he heard the radio, and he was about 20 years old at that point, a couple of years into college, and he realized that he would be going to war also. It was just a matter of whether he'd be volunteering or whether he'd be drafted. And I think that there was the initial shock of the day, but then of course with Franklin Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech the next day on December 8th, 1941, I think that really set the tone for what was coming.
It's hard to imagine what those men and women went through at Pearl Harbor. We have some video we want to share with you of things as it occurred. This looks to be in the early stages, and then it gets worse. But I want to point out something to you folks at home. These photographers were under fire just like everybody else, and they stayed and took the pictures. Without them, there would have been no permanent record of this. And I don't think anybody's ever pointed that out before, but what's taking place here? The Arizona, the Oklahoma, all these massive ships went to the bottom. Such a surprise. No inkling at all, was there?
Not for a major attack at Pearl Harbor. I think that the American strategic planners, both in the Navy and the Army, had expected that if there was an attack on the American forces, it would be the Philippines, it would be Guam, it would be Wake Island, and the worries at Pearl Harbor were maybe a midget submarine or two midget submarines sneaking into the harbor, or maybe some saboteurs destroying some aircraft. But in terms of having a Sunday morning where you have two waves, first wave is at 8 a.m., second wave's at 9 a.m., totaling nearly 400 Japanese aircraft, that massive kind of an attack was really not expected, and it was very much a surprise.
And so thought out, so organized, so planned that they knew to strafe the areas where the wounded, if there were surviving wounded men and women, where they'd be taken.
Yes. Yes, that was very well planned out. In fact, this wasn't the only plan the Japanese had, and nearly simultaneously they attacked Pearl Harbor, they attacked Wake Island, they attacked Guam, they attacked Philippines, and within a week they had launched into Southeast Asia, towards Singapore. So this was a multi-part attack that spread over the entire Pacific. And I think that the planners at the time, the American planners and American leaders, underestimated the audacity and the creativity of the Japanese. And that's a big lesson to be learned. One shouldn't ever underestimate one's potential enemy.
I want to tell you something. I came across a bit of news today that really was disturbing. Pearl Harbor is still a resting place and considered sacred ground, if you will, where so many of our people remain entombed.
Yes, sir.
There are other warships off the coasts of other countries, and I just found out this morning that some of those have disappeared, and they couldn't figure out why at first. Now they recognize they were salvage operations. People went in, somehow removed the ships, which still contained the remains of the men on board, and were to be respected as, permanent sites, and they're gone. All that's left is the imprint in the ocean floor of where they were. They've protected the elements rather well at Pearl Harbor, have they not?
Absolutely. It is, for example, on the Arizona, if there are survivors of the Arizona, the few that did survive, or other survivors of Pearl Harbor do have the option to be laid to rest with their comrades in arms at the Arizona. The Arizona has not been very much disturbed. There's still oil leaking, actually, out of the Arizona from 75 years ago. So they do have that option. And the numbers are dwindling now, obviously, as the years pass. But yes, they do have that option.
I want to make a program pitch here while I've got you here.
Yes, sir.
We're going to be showing a special program on Pearl Harbor as part of a festival. And we have a clip that we'd like to play for you. And Emily, if you will roll that now, please.
Everybody knew exactly what was going on as soon as that first plane came over and dropped the first torpedoes.
We heard a tremendous explosion.
The whole harbor was on fire. I stood ankle deep in blood.
1,177 men lost that day.
These were young kids.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.
December 7th, 8 p.m. Don't miss it. Part of festival here on Rogers State Public Television. This is a must-see for all generations. Please tune in. You have lived through a number of anniversaries of Pearl Harbor. You ever get the feeling sometimes that, gosh, I know too much. I wish I didn't know about this. I wish I didn't know all that surrounds it. Does it bother you in that respect?
Yes and no. I think it would bother me more if I wasn't a college professor and I didn't get to educate people about it. Mm-hmm. And I had worked for the Army for several years as a historian, as a civilian historian, so I got to interact with soldiers who had seen combat, and so that also has factored into my desire to try to recreate to the best of my ability what happened at Pearl Harbor and elsewhere, and other conflicts. So I think I would feel worse if I had to bottle it up, although I've never been a veteran, but I've read a lot, and it's, these are just absolutely moving, compelling, poignant stories.
Have you had a chance to talk with any survivors of Pearl Harbor?
Not of Pearl Harbor directly, but I've talked with a lot of veterans from the European theater primarily, and then some Marines from the Pacific.
Wow. David, thank you. It's
Yes.
always a pleasure to have you here. Your expertise lends so much credibility to what I do.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you for taking time.
Yes, sir.
And we're out of time. That's all we have for this edition of Perspective. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.